I'm gonna pace around a lot, so hopefully this works well. Sorry, camera guy, but we'll see how this goes. So they gave me the 1 hour after lunch spot, so everybody's gonna be sleepy, and I'm gonna talk about documentation. We'll see how this goes. But we'll try and have a little bit of fun with it while we go. So, step one, audience participation. Keep people engaged, right? So, how many of you have ever heard somebody say, I don't want to be a software developer, a network engineer that's like, I don't want to do this. I got into this to do the networking thing. Is anybody willing to admit they've said it? Hey, there's some honest people here today. Good job. So, how many people here are actively automating everything in their network? Sweet. Okay, I was waiting for everybody to raise their hand. I was like, cool, I'm done. So actually, maybe that would have been good. I don't know. After me is the break, so maybe that would have been more efficient. But now at least we have something to talk about. So nobody's doing full automation. How many people have just kind of random ad hoc? I've got a couple scripts to set an IP address, change a VLAN. Not as many as I was expecting, but okay. So basically, this is actually going to be, that bit pretty much sums it up. Like this, a lot of times I've gone through sessions where people will talk about network automation and they're like, network automation, here's Python, done. And it's not that easy. There's more that goes into it. So really today I just kind of want to cover some of the different ways that you go from, hey, this is how I've always done things, to starting to get into the automation world. How do you get from point A to point B? Before we get into that, though, just start off with a real world example. If I gave you directions and said, go right, go straight, what do I have here? Slight left, straight, right, right. What do you do? Like, where do you end up? Where do you go? We could validate that, and I could say, well, did you do everything that I told you to? And you could say yes, but did you get where you were supposed to? So the big thing is in order to start figuring this stuff out, directions like that, you have to know where did you start. So if we just kind of laid everybody out in this is a pretty big building, it's a pretty big city, we put everybody everywhere and told them to go through and do that, we're all gonna end up in different spots because though we went through the process and we validated we did what we were supposed to, we didn't know where we were starting from. When we talk about this in a networking world, hopefully that's kind of readable. So the first example I have on there is just going in and if you're setting up a switch port, setting up a trunk, how many people have forgot the word add when setting up VLANs? So, but from a validation standpoint, like I've worked places where when we go through our change control and you've got your validation is just, did that command run? So if I do a show run and I look for that command, is the data there? Well, yes, but other data that should have been there isn't. So like, we're missing a part here. Second example, I don't even remember what I put in here, MTU. You change MTU on an interface, but the other side isn't correct. How many people have dealt with MTU mismatches? So, OSPF doesn't like MTU mismatches. Whole bunch of things don't like MTU mismatches. I can change the MTU on an interface, that's great, but does it actually do what I wanted it to? Like, I can look at the config, I can look at the interface, I can see that it changed, but did it actually do what I wanted? Is the network functioning better than it was, or did I create problems? And then the last one, NTP servers. Really great example of just something really, really basic. You go in, you apply an NTP server. Great. Is it actually working? Are you getting time from the device, or is it just the config is there? So when we're going through and we're thinking about this stuff, the first thing you've got to know is like the VLAN example. You have to know what VLANs were on that interface before you go through and you figure out what VLANs am I adding, what should it look like. You have to know where you started to know what you've changed and where you end up. So this is where all this kind of comes into the kind of the building blocks for trying to build out this automation journey. Step one, collect data. There's been actually the last couple presentations were all about data. And that's the big thing. Like what do you have? What's going on? What's out there? Kind of broken this into two different groups. So we've got documentation. This is kind of the static information on the environment. what's, inventory information or topologies, things like that. What's out there, somewhat static. But then you also have the state information. So things like we've talked about, there's been a couple of conversations now about BGP peers. The route tables on your devices change day to day, hour to hour, whatever. So you've got the kind of the static information, but you also have dynamic information. Being able to collect that and understand, again, where am I starting from is an important part of figuring out all of your automation strategy. How many people have solid inventories and topology diagrams? How many people have like a really solid understanding of just the state of the environment at any given point? What's up, what's down, what interfaces are doing what? More people. How many people have run into an issue and you spent more time trying to find the issue, like the information of what you're trying to solve, than the fix actually took? Those are the fun ones. So the big idea here is, well, who likes doing documentation? Nobody raised their hand. Wow. So documentation is boring. Nobody has fun with it. Maybe somebody does, but most of them then aren't network engineers, they're like writers. So that's one. The other thing is you get done with the project and somebody's like, hey, you're done with that thing, we have another thing for you to do. So you jump to the next thing instead of documenting what you did. Next one is central repositories. How many people have documentation, but it's in SharePoint or GitHub or 6 different places, maybe. Or somebody's desktop, or like that one guy knew it, but he left the company 2 years ago. So you lack that type of stuff. Brownfield environments. You've picked something up, some environment that you don't work, or how many people have gone through acquisitions or mergers? Yeah. Picking up somebody else's environment, understanding what they did, why they did. If you go into something like that and you don't know what they did or how it's working, your ability to work with it, not so good. So there's a lot of different reasons that documentation doesn't happen, but it's important. The reason for that, again, is this is your starting point. Where are you? What do you have? How is it configured? You need to know that to be able to move things forward. Second part then, and right now we're kind of going through talking about what some of these problems are. I'll touch on some of the ways that this stuff can be solved, but really it's just thinking about this kind of conceptually. Is if you're looking at getting into the automation process, these are things that oftentimes people are just like, you need a source of truth. What does that mean? Why do I need it? What do I do to get there? So second thing is when we get into the automation space, there's kind of 2 parts to this again. We've got the intent. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to, I don't know, improve performance or add resiliency, or there's something that you're trying to accomplish? What is it? Do you have that documented? So that could be things like policies. These are, from a security standpoint, we want AAA enabled on all of our devices, or we want Telnet access disabled. So you've got all of that from an intent standpoint, and then you've actually got your automation side. How are you actually going to push that? It could be scripting, it could be tools like Itential or Glueware or Ansible, what have you. There's, just make the junior engineer do it. Like, here's your script, go. How many people have been the junior engineer given the script and told go implement? So, by my standards, that's still automation. I just say, hey, go do, and it gets done, automated. Just because somebody else did it, it's still. So, this idea though, of we're gonna take things, we need to go from wherever it is that we are to where we wanna be. We need to understand, again, where we were, and then what we want, what our goal is, what's the intended state, how do we get there? Challenges with doing that. So a lot of times going through, if you lack consistency from a configuration standpoint, or you have multi-vendor environments, trying to automate that, trying to build something from that becomes difficult. If you don't necessarily have a set idea of what the policy is, or brownfield environments or whatever, where you've got things that you're just kind of stringing together, it becomes a little bit more challenging to build that in kind of a cohesive fashion instead of just your little kind of ad hoc scripts. So why does intent actually matter when we talk about automation? Again, this gets back to what are you trying to do? Just because you ran a script or you've got a playbook or whatever, what are you actually trying to accomplish? If you don't know where your goal is, if you don't know what you're aiming for, how do you know if you hit it or I just ran a script and something happened? So then the third leg of this is the actual assurance or validation, verification, whatever term we want to use. But this is basically going back to the first thing of what's the state of the environment and what's the intent. No idea whether or not this code actually works, but it looks pretty. So essentially the idea though is, does the state match what you want the environment or the intent to be? If your state matches your intent, you're good to go. Things are working as they should. If the state doesn't match the intent, now you've got a problem. The device or the environment isn't functioning the way that you want it to, the way that you had planned. So this is where, from an automation standpoint, you could feed that back in, and now you can start to build out basically this looping process. Does it match where it should? If yes, great. If no, do whatever it is to fix it. But again, in order to do that, where are you? Where do you want to be? How do you get there? So, challenges with trying to do that validation. Again, you don't have your intent. You don't know where you want to be. How do you validate that you're there? You don't understand where you are. How do you know if you're there? Scale. If you've got a large environment, trying to keep track of this stuff gets challenging. How many people have a naming convention, and then the previous naming convention, and then the previous naming convention, and then the one before that, all running concurrently? So, those types of things where, yeah, you go through, everybody has this like, we're gonna standardize, and then we're gonna change the standard, but we never go back and update the old standard. You go through 3 or 4 iterations of that, and now your ability to validate, well, do I validate to the current standard or the previous standard or both standards? So it's trying to understand, getting that consistency of where you wanna be, how do you get there? The end goal of all this then is this concept of closed loop automation. So it actually doesn't look half bad. So the idea here is that you're gonna start with this idea of you have a network, you have an environment that's running. The network knows, how many people have used the phrase, the network is the documentation? So it's true, but it's not necessarily easily consumable by most engineers. Like, yes, it's there, but if I said, hey, go show me all of these things, and you've got to log into every single one, it's not gonna be quick. So basically having something built out where you can build a state database from the network devices, pull the data from the devices, put it into a single database where now you can query that, that's gonna give you the full understanding of the state of the environment. Second part then is that intent. Now you need to have some sort of list of what do you want things to be? What are the policies? What's the golden config? However we want to term it. What are you trying to accomplish? And then we've got that assurance piece. Are we doing what we wanted to? If yes, we're done, and then we're going to repeat this process because networks aren't static, things are always changing. So that state could change daily or hourly or whatever. We need to continually be making sure that our state matches. In the event that our state doesn't match our intent, that's where we're gonna have to kick off something to basically bring things back in line. Going through and kind of building that out then, your automated config change or manual config change or whatever it might be, that's gonna change the state of the network, which now is gonna feed back into updating your state, you check your intent. This is kind of building out that what eventually could kind of become like a CI/CD pipeline where this is where we're going, this is where we need to get, but it's really trying to understand, again, where am I, where do I want to get, how do I go from A to B? Why assurance then matters. Touched on this a couple times already, but this is really trying to just confirm, are you on target? Are you doing what you want? Handful of tools that can help. So this is one where this is kind of fun. ServiceNow, So ServiceNow, you can do like the CMDB, you can track things there. Some pros and cons to it. Netbox Labs, they've got a lot of this information. Nautabot, there's a bunch of tools that can do this. Supposed to be vendor agnostic, so there's one that we can't talk about, but whatever. You'll figure it out. But the overall idea is there's a lot of different tools that can help you get there. Trying to automate the network and build all this stuff manually, not an easy task, which is why none of you have fully automated everything end to end. There's tools, there's been presentations by a handful of people that have talked about different ways that they do this or different tools that are out there that can help start getting this information. So really the big thing here is that to get from wherever it is you are now to that automated, everything's great, everything's as it should be kind of endpoint, being able to automate that documentation, automate the understanding of the environment. From an engineer standpoint, nobody out there is like, yes, I want to go do nothing but documentation all day. So being able to automate that means that as network engineers, network architects, whatever, you can go through and you can do the stuff that you want to do. It also means then from a troubleshooting standpoint, documentation is helpful in troubleshooting. How many people have gone into a troubleshooting situation? You open up the document, you're 2-3 hours into troubleshooting, then you realize the document's out of date and everything that you were trying to sort, like, oh, that switch was decommissioned 2 years ago. So, documentation, one of the things that I've said quite a bit is that I would rather have no documentation than inaccurate documentation. So, that idea of if it's incorrect and I trust it, I'm going to potentially go down the wrong path from a troubleshooting standpoint. If we're looking at that from an automation standpoint, I could be building my automation with flawed information. So by having something that's automated, that's collecting the state information, understanding the environment, you hopefully are able to avoid some of those pitfalls. You get the information, you understand what's happening. You as an engineer aren't going through and trying to update Visio, or how many people have their IPAM is in Excel? So, how many, actually, we'll run with that for a second. How many people then with IPAM in Excel have run into issues where somebody didn't update it, you grabbed what you thought was a free address, only to find out it was used somewhere else? So it's those types of things where having this automated documentation system pulls that out from an end user having to do, pulls it out from a network engineer having to maintain it, because let's be honest, we're not good at it. That's not what we do, that's not what we like to do, that's not what we want to do, but we all typically enjoy using documentation. Usually it's good when you have documentation that tells you what's going on. When you look at things like tribal knowledge and you've got that one person that set that one thing up and they know what it does, and then they go on vacation and that thing breaks, and now you've got to try and troubleshoot it with zero documentation. Who's been in that kind of a situation? Who's been the person that knew everything that went on vacation when the thing broke and then got the phone calls? The joy of camping. I'm outside of cell phone range. If it broke, good luck. So this is the big thing. If you have an automated documentation platform, anybody else on the team can log in, get that information. Hopefully that means that you don't get that call when you're on vacation. That means that other people are capable of doing that. One of the comments that I've heard frequently when people start talking about this is the idea that, well, that's my job security. Anybody take that approach? Good, because otherwise you're going to be mad at me because I'm going to make fun of you next. So that idea becomes problematic, because if your job is being that single point of knowledge in an environment, when that thing breaks and you're on vacation and you're getting a phone call, nobody wants that. The ability to, if you can make it to a point where you can, I've heard a lot of people say, I'll automate myself out of a job. First off, it's difficult to do. And secondly, if you can get to a point where you can automate yourself out of a job, there are 1,000 companies that will hire you in a heartbeat so that you can automate them out of it. It's not, like, yes, it can happen, but it's not, you will not find yourself poor and homeless if you automate yourself out of a job. You now have a skill set that will be very, very useful. So it's this idea of building these systems up is only going to benefit you, it benefits the organization, it benefits the other people on the team. This is wins across the board. And how many people like sitting on, like, you're on call, you get a call at 2 in the morning, you're trying to figure out a ticket with no information. That's everybody's favorite thing to do, right? So again, getting this documentation, getting the understanding of the environment to build the automation, build that workflow, you can circle through that, and all of a sudden everything hopefully gets easier. You can manage the environment, maintain it, scale it, do whatever it is you need to do with it with relative ease. So I actually went through a lot of that a little quicker than I was thinking, but since I'm right up against a break, I figure nobody's going to be too mad at me if we wrap that up early. With that said, open it up for questions, see if anybody wants to beat me up real quick. Everybody just wants to go to break. Oh boy.
Automated documentation is obviously a good thing, but kind of to your point, like, the documentation is only good if it's actually providing value. So is it really, is this just kind of like a unicorn that we're kind of chasing more so with the automated documentation, or are we getting closer to where, there's good documentation that can actually not only build me more than just a spider web diagram, but actually something that actually represents what I'm actually trying to architect?
Yes. I'm supposed to
Next
remain.
question.
I'm supposed to remain vendor neutral, so I will say yes, and I will say that if you want more information, I'm more than happy to discuss ways that you can do it. I will throw the shameless plug for a lot of the stuff that has been kind of shown today can do a lot of that stuff, where there are tools that are out there that can do, like, network diagramming. There are tools that can do some of the config management. So there are definitely tools that are out there. There's one that I might be a little bit more preferential to, but I spent 20 years in the field. The company that I work for because the technology is awesome. The technology isn't awesome because I work for the company. So I've been a big fan of just any form of network automation, visibility, things like that. Like, these are the pains that network engineers deal with from the dawn of networking. So trying to get that information in a way that's useful and I don't have to do it is huge. But yeah, to kind of circle back, there are definitely tools that can do it, that can provide reliable information, that can provide, layer 2, layer 3 information. ACLs, how many people have had a firewall issue where so that type of thing, where it's being able to get that, yes, it's documented in the network, but if I got, we go from point A to point B, how do I get that information? There are definitely tools that can show you that.
Cool, thank you.
So we talk about all these tools. What do you think of, what's your opinions on the mindset? How do you get into that mindset? I have guys, I tell them, hey, every Friday from afternoon, it's kind of a break from you, from noon to quitting time, you got to do your documentation. And even that doesn't work. So, your thoughts on?
To be blunt, I think that's trying to get people to do the documentation is an argument that you will perpetually never win. It's something where being able to actually sit down and focus on it is challenging. I've been in environments where we were very, very meticulous with our documentation, but there was always that, the one guy that would run into the data center to do that thing really quick. I was talking to somebody yesterday about everybody's got rack elevation diagrams, right? You go in, how many people have gone into their data center to rack up a piece of gear only to find out that there's gear already racked where you were trying to put whatever it was you were installing? So it basically becomes if you're in an environment where the documentation isn't necessarily reliable, people aren't necessarily motivated to maintain it, and then it basically becomes its own self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're not going to maintain the documentation, or if it's not reliable, you're not going to put the effort into it because it's not reliable, and it just kind of feeds itself, which is why the kind of the automated documentation idea, let the systems do that for you automatically. It's the way that the documentation is done. If you look at like a switch or router, you can look at CDP, LLDP information. They know what their neighbors are. They know what their state is. The whole idea of the network is the documentation. Like that makes sense. So instead of you trying to convert that manually, let a tool do it for you.
Okay, good idea with a tool. What tool does documentation in a large enterprise with 5, 6 different vendors and products that change every, 2 years from a vendor? They're looking for more money from us. We used to have routers on the WAN. Right now we have SD-WAN. Right, where do I pull that documentation from that, right? Do I get tooled into your SD-WAN platform? I think we're talking for the sake of talking here.
So I was told that I can have company logos on the first and last slide. This is my last slide. It's finding the workaround. So the short answer is yes, there are tools that can do it. There are tools that are multi-vendor. One of the conversations that I've had a lot is the idea of, you name a vendor, like every vendor has their management platforms, and some vendors have their, like, here's our campus management platform, and here's our security management platform, and here's our data center management platform, and WAN management platform, and every single one of them is unique. So even in a single vendor ecosystem, you have multiple platforms, so you have multiple sources of documentation. There is a company that can do that across multiple platforms, laying it on thick, trying to still be vendor neutral. But like I said, I also just generally dig the technology. But again, there's parts of this that, like Netbox or Nautabot, or there are plenty of companies that are out there that can do this kind of stuff. I might be a little bit preferential, but I mean, we're not the only company that does it, but might say we're the best, but we can debate that later.